And then that led to me being admitted to the hospital. And after that experience, I promised myself I would never compromise my health for the other goals that I set.
You're listening to Hustle Culture, a podcast that shows you how to take your hustle to the next level. I'm Jordan Glickman, a 24-year-old homeless entrepreneur who's constantly looking for a better way. Whether it be maximizing work-life balance while trying to reach my first 7 figures, or taking advantage of credit card points and biohacking my way to optimal health and efficiency, I'm all about it. Regardless if you're an entrepreneur or not, I invite you to join me in my journey of constant self-development. Join me and my guest as we deliver real value and actionable steps to embrace and make the most out of your hustle.
Welcome back to yet another podcast, and today we're going to talk about a mistake that I made when I was first starting out in business, and one that I see a lot of other entrepreneurs make, both young and older entrepreneurs. And really, I think anybody that is striving towards a goal and has a high amount of work hours that they have to complete on a weekly basis over and over. And ultimately, that mistake is sacrificing your health in return for reaching your goal supposedly faster, and how ultimately I think that that's actually kind of false logic. So one of the things that I noticed when I first started out was my happiness was super high. And we all know that I think that that eagerness when you first start a business does start to eventually decline to an extent. I mean, not entirely. Does it always go away for everybody, or does it completely start to decline? But I think the happiness and the eagerness to start your business is always at its peak. Typically, in my opinion, at least from my current experience, which is only so much in business, is normally more there or so in the beginning. And so you start to, or at least in my position, I started to then say to myself, well, I've got all the time in the world, but I need this time to start the business. I need to get it up and running. And so I said, you know what, if I can just give it 2 or 3 more hours of working, then I don't have to worry about the gym, or I don't have to worry about, staying healthy and staying fit because, well, I'm already healthy. I'm already fit. At least in my mind, in my eyes, I was. And so it was kind of this ultimately flawed logic saying that I can just come back to it later, not ultimately having a structured date as to when I would or how I would come back to it. Because of course, when you stop anything, especially something that's like working out, where it requires a lot of mental and physical capacity, it's not as easy to just jump right into it tomorrow and give it all you got, like how you may have been doing in the past. And so with that said, health being the thing that ultimately enables you to do all the things that you can do, not just in business and mentally, but also physically, the things that you enjoy, spending time with family, whatever it may be, health is what enables and allows all of that. Health is so incredibly important. And I think that goes without saying, but I think that had I had this podcast as a nice reminder in the first 6 months of starting my business, I would have probably made a few small different decisions back in that time versus what I ended up doing just by having that little bug in my ear saying, hey, don't give this up. Keep at it. You've got the time to keep working out. And we're going to talk about why I found that to be so important after I ended up going to the hospital at some point for my health deteriorating. So when I first started my business, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but I had around $40,000 cash in the bank. And so when I first started, I was technically, under some people's eyes, comfortable, where I had enough cash to be able to do what I needed to do. And I didn't have to worry about food, rent, and your fixed costs, the things that you have to worry about when you're first starting a business. Anything that you are going to have to expense out for. Because the business I was starting only cost me about $1,000 or $2,000 to ultimately start up. It didn't require a lot of capital. So that $40,000 in the bank was really just more of a safety net to be able to pay for my food, my living, and all the things that I needed in order to be able to get up on my feet and get the business running. So I started treating the beginning of my journey as if I didn't have anything. I treated it as if there was nothing in the bank and I could only spend what I made, which was a massive, I don't know if I would call it a mistake, but it kind of is. I just would say probably a bad decision on my part. And this was ultimately due because I was not in a position where I ultimately understood how to effectively leverage my own capital. I didn't have any mentors. I wasn't partnered with somebody with high levels of experience. I was, reading books and listening to podcasts and trying to consume what content and information I could. But at that point in time, I did not have the experience or the know-how how to leverage my capital to make it work for me at the time. And so I was trying to make money by selling my time, by selling my skill sets and my knowledge. And that's really all that I knew how to do at that current time. I was aware that I could make my money work for me, but I wasn't aware of how to do it. And so again, that's what kept me in the position and that small thinking mindset that I needed to save what I had and I could only spend what I was able to make ultimately on those things like my living, my rent, my phone bill, etc., the essentials that I needed to keep the business running and keep me running as a human. So when we first started out, we were only making about $1,000 each per month. And I say we because back then I did have a partner in the business. We ultimately just had different philosophies on business, how to invest, how to start the business, how to keep it running, and so on and so forth. With that aside, that's probably a story for another time, but we were ultimately each pulling in about $1,000 each. And that's the equivalent in the US of making about $3,000 net. So we were able to live comfortably, but it was definitely not something super exciting, wherein, we were able to afford rent and food and phone bills and all of these basics that you need, but there was definitely not a ton of savings to be pulled out of the business in those first months or really the first year of business. And so this resulted in me making enough to just cover food and rent and so on, keeping my money that I could in my bank account, but not growing it. And that led to me then purchasing energy drinks and having them 1 to 2 times a day, because in the Philippines here, they cost, I believe, around 50 cents, so half a US dollar, give or take on which ones you're buying. And I was consistently getting 6 hours of sleep. I think back then I had a horrible sleep schedule, was going to bed at 2 and waking up at like 8. I was definitely working 7 days a week, completely nonstop. I didn't know which day was the weekend. I didn't care if it was a holiday. I didn't even know if it was a holiday because I was in a completely different country. If it was my birthday, none of it mattered. It was just work, 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 which I'm not completely against in certain instances. But when you add all of these things up that I'm adding here, it definitely was not a recipe for success. I did end up having completely zero breaks. I always had my computer on me. There was no balance whatsoever for enjoying anything. I mean, maybe I definitely did some things here and there, but it was not consistent. I wasn't getting the time I needed to mentally kind of recover and also work on that side of health. So mental health as well too. And I was spending, I think, $30 a week on food consistently, which again, I am in the Philippines, but the cost of food in a grocery store is roughly the same as in the US. And I remember when I was living in the US, I was spending probably between $70 and $100 a week on food. So, just the quality of food that I was choosing to eat, the amount of food I was making the decision to eat, it was all, again, just not a good recipe for the ultimate success, not something that was sustainable and long-term. And that went on for about 6 months to a year. I think there were points where I was better about it and it wasn't consistently $30 a week for an entire year or energy drinks completely 2 times a day for an entire year. There were some days that I had 3 energy drinks and other days where I had none, just by decision, or I just decided not to go to the store to buy one. But it was quite consistent, relatively speaking, across that period of time. And it was just a horrible recipe for disaster. It ended up putting me in a position where I was then more moody all the time because I just didn't have the food that I wanted to. I didn't have the kind of breaks that I needed to have, and so many more things. It was harder to curate relationships, both personal and in business, because I just maybe wasn't all there in the head, or I wasn't focused. I had massive headaches and migraines that were just awful. And then that led to me being admitted to the hospital. And after that experience, I promised myself I would never compromise my health for the other goals that I set. And I say that with so much confidence because when I had a migraine for I think it was 5 days straight, it was something quite unrealistic, something that I knew internally, this is not healthy. I need to get help. When I realized that that was what it came down to, I knew that I was not treating myself the way that I should have. And I was prescribed, I think, a couple medications for, I don't know if it was a week or something like that to help clear it all out. But I also found out that I had a high resting heart rate, high blood pressure. And to me, that just really irked me inside. Coming from my personal training background, and as much as I know about personal training and health and fitness and wellness, it was just like, man, dude, you've been making some bad decisions. And so it got me in the position and the right mindset that, sacrificing my health for these goals, regardless if they're monetary or whatever they may be, or they're just achievements that I want to achieve in life, because not all of them are just monetary. A lot of the goals are just, I want to accomplish X, and that's what I'm striving for. I realized sacrificing my health and not being able to do X and Y in the future, whether it was physical or not, just not having the best of health would limit so many of the things that I want to experience and do in the later part of my life, whether it's in my 20s, 30s, or 60s. I knew that it was going to affect that. And so it was something that I had to snap out of and I had to fix immediately. Now, this is all coincidence, but what did end up happening after I fixed that little problem, I think that happened in a November or December time period roughly. In January, from January 1 until the next 90 days, I closed more in revenue for those 90 days than I did in the past 12 months. Now, again, this is all partially coincidental, but it showed me because during that time period, I was still going on, I think I was doing at the time 5K runs or 5K jogs. Every single morning, I was going to the gym on top of that every single day. And so it showed me that I had the time to fit in to do all of that. Because in that time, that was a massive change in our business where I had to effectively start actually looking at hiring people because we now had enough work and money to be able to do that. I had to figure out how to train them. I had to figure out how to onboard all of these clients. This was about the time that me and my partner split. So it was a massive time of growth for myself where I was having to learn and take on so many more different roles in the business. And I was still having to then keep focusing on my health. And I conquered it. I killed it. I crushed it. And there was no doubt that there was plenty of time in the day to still do that, to still even have an hour break to just watch YouTube or whatever it was that gave me that mental break. I still had the time to do that. There was absolutely no reason that I didn't have the time or wasn't able to make the time for my health and for myself. So I completely believe that there is no excuse that you cannot find an hour a day to work out. And I know that sounds so cheesy because you hear it so many times from so many trainers and whatever it may be. But going from a position where I wasn't making almost anything and I didn't think I had enough time for going to the gym or I didn't have the motivation to a point where I was making, I don't know what it is, what the number is, but say 4x or 5x per month, whatever it is, than before, to where I was able to take care of my health and to a much greater extent. It opened my eyes it's so sad that I had to go through a bad experience with the hospital and such, but it got me again to where I am today, where I now can value that and I can hopefully share that story and this experience with others that are in their journey where they may be, sacrificing their health for their goals. And so that is again the reason of this podcast. Because sacrificing your health for the sake of your business or for any goals that you have is counterproductive. If you just logically think about it, you're going after these goals or you're building your business to be able to create some kind of, financial freedom, some success that you would enable you to have more life experiences or certain types of experiences. But if your health is not well in your 30s, in your 60s, a lot of those experiences that you want to have, you will not be able to. And that to me was just, again, it was so eye-opening and something that I really took to the heart, and I promised that I would just never make that mistake again. So now, in the midst of COVID, where so many things have changed and my routine has indefinitely changed, I think it changes maybe every quarter or every 2 quarters. Right now, I'm doing 10,000 steps a day. I don't have any gyms that I'm able to go to or much else, and I'm not that big on working out in my own home. It's just not something that I'm very motivated by. So I do 10,000 steps a day. I got a dog. I actually got her quite a while ago, but I walk her every single day for 10,000 steps, which is about an hour and a half's walk. And to me, that's enough to keep my blood pressure down, keep my resting heart rate down, and to ultimately keep me healthy and keep me sane. Because also one thing that I can say as someone that's worked remotely for quite a long time now, being able to get any kind of exercise or any kind of activity creates a massive change in your mental clarity and your mental focus in your business if you can make time for that every single day. So the first thing I do when I wake up is I get up and I'll walk out the door and I'll get 10,000 steps in immediately. And that for me is just an incredible way to start my day. I know that when gyms open again, what I'm probably going to try and shift to is 2 to 3 runs per week and then 5 lifting days per week. But again, it doesn't matter what you're going to do. The biggest thing is consistency. But if you don't feel like it today, and you don't feel like doing whatever it is that you're setting out to improve your health, if you don't feel like doing that today, do it anyways. And I say that with full confidence because if you stop today, you will ruin a lot of the other things and structures that you have in place to reaching your goals for tomorrow, for next week, for next month, and next year. And that's something that I talked about in my last podcast, where if you don't hold yourself disciplined to the goals and the structure that you set up to reach your long-term and short-term goals, anything that you stop now, just missing that one run or missing that one gym workout, it starts to snowball effect. So check out that past podcast. I think it was the one right before this one where I did talk about that. But find that consistency. Figure out what's realistic for your time, for your goals of health and fitness and as business as well, how they can all mesh together and really get after it. So I hope my experience with sacrificing my health in the hopeful result of getting more or doing better in business, where it really was actually quite counterproductive when I'm looking back on it. I hope that experience was just eye-opening to at least just one person, because I think, again, if I can change one person's mind about sacrificing their health for the sake of their business or their goals that they've set, I think that it could change their life and potentially even for the better if they were to not come to the realization that I did and they ended up in the hospital for much worse conditions than what I had. So as always, I hope that you took away a piece of value from this podcast, and I cannot thank you enough for listening to it this far, and I will be excited to see you in the next podcast. Take care.
Hey there, hustlers. That's this week's episode of the Hustle Culture Podcast. Thank you again for listening, and don't forget to join us next week for another episode. If you're able to take away any bit of value from this episode and you want to support the channel, there are 3 things that you could do that would massively support me and the team that make all of this possible. The first one is to leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast at. The second one would be to share it with a friend. And the third one would be to head over to jordanglickman.com, go to the resource tab, and I've compiled all of the best resources and tools that I use from amassing as many credit card points as I have to structuring my day. I know it will be a great resource to most people listening. That's all for me today, and thank you again for tuning in to Hustle Culture.